Welcome to the video. This video brought to you in part by Dunkin' Donuts. They don't pay me or anything, but I wouldn't say no if they ever actually do decide to sponsor me. So just in case, I really like the smooth, bold taste of an original blend medium roast cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee while creating the latest top-tier niche content for you guys. So for the finest cheap cup of coffee you can buy in mass production, America runs on Dunkin'. If you enjoy this video and like to see more, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. This video is combining two things I have an interest in: pop culture media and Star Wars in particular, as well as historical military analysis. The question is, what would have happened if Darth Vader from the Galactic Empire was sent to 1930s Imperial Japan? As most people are aware, in the lead up to the Second World War, Imperial Japan began a wave of expansions throughout Asia and the Pacific. The Empire of Japan was then checked mostly economically by the United States by restricting their access to oil, which led to the eventual Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. This led to the United States' official entry into World War II and caused the eventual downfall of Imperial Japan as American production and military might crushed the small island empire. Next we come to Darth Vader. Darth Vader was a Sith Lord, apprentice to Darth Sidious of Darth Bane's Rule of Two line of the Sith Lords. Vader was roughly the second in command of his master's Galactic Empire, occupying a semi-official place as the right hand of Emperor Palpatine. In his prior life, Vader was a Jedi Knight named Anakin Skywalker, originally a slave boy on the desert planet of Tatooine that rose to become a Jedi General in the Clone Wars that specialized in commanding his clone troopers in the Grand Army of the Republic in assaults on their mostly droid enemy, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. As a general, Vader led from the front, driving his men forward through his bold actions, skills, and use of his massive power in the Force. As a Jedi, Vader was also shown to be able to speak and quickly learn new languages with assistance from the Force. Darth Vader was also one of the best pilots in the galaxy, and a mechanical genius capable of building and improving machines as simple as protocol droids for his mother as a slave, all the way to improving the base design of the Grand Army of the Republic's Venator-class Star Destroyers. These skills are shown to still be true even as Vader, though with less opportunities to display them than he had as Anakin Skywalker. What will be our scenario then? Darth Vader, shortly before the Battle of Endor, will be transported to 1930 Imperial Japan. This period, shortly before they launch their first major expansion waves into Manchuria, will give Vader the time to integrate into the Imperial Japanese hierarchy. Vader has two major factors working in his favor: the Force and his own personal martial skills. He can use the Force to dominate the minds of opponents to his sudden insertion into the Empire, and his martial skills will allow him to continue to survive and dominate the inevitable assassination attempts and challenges that will be thrown his way. Vader is not a stupid man. Having come from his own empire and seeing the weak nature of the Imperial household's grip on their military, he would likely nominally serve this new empire and integrate himself into the Imperial Japanese military. His most crucial steps in that regard will begin by assessing the technological and political state of the world, where he will likely begin formulating his own plans. What would Vader bring to Imperial Japan? Vader's likely first actions would be to demonstrate his knowledge of advanced mechanics. This would almost immediately see a boost in the Japanese military equipment across the board as he implemented new designs and streamlined the Japanese equipment pipelines. This is based on the Galactic Empire being an extremely standardized force, where even if their equipment wasn't the best, something it likely would be in that era, it was easily replaced and resupplied at minimum. As a general in the Clone Wars, Vader had shown a basic knowledge of logistics and fleet command, two things that would slot very well with the Navy-dominated Imperial Japanese military of the time. However, he was also a strong ground commander, and though there was a strong inter-service rivalry between the two, the advanced technology that Vader would wield would almost certainly make him friends on both sides. Vader would therefore most likely begin by attempting to end the sometimes fratricidal inter-service rivalry, possibly by creating his own branch of Imperial Japanese Marines, similar to the Storm and Clone Trooper units that he would be familiar with. This new 501st, to pick a name, could begin feeding into a bridge of unity. This would likely not earn him many friends, but political alliances and use of the Force should see its beginnings come together. Even if it's only to unite against Vader, they should help calm down the inter-service rivalry to a degree at least, since it's hard to make it worse than it was in history without having an active civil war going on. How would this affect Japan then? By ending or at least reducing the inter-service rivalry with his new 501st, Vader would start building his own power base, but would also be giving the Empire a strong possibility of the first true combined arms units that Japan would have. As the invasion of Manchuria began, the unit's results would speak for themselves. Vader would be likely leading from the front, boosting the results much further. However, these results would allow him to begin diverting resources to begin its true expansion of his Imperial Japanese military vision. Based on his experience with the Grand Army of the Republic, his first actions would be to build some of the best armor and aircraft of the period. Perennial Japanese wartime problems with things like thin or non-existent armor would be swiftly corrected on pain of death by Vader, with things like self-sealing fuel tanks becoming standard on aircraft, increasing pilot survival rates. He would also likely end the practices of the Japanese forcing their aces to stay in their fighters until they died, likely rotating his pilots to begin training the next generation. This is based on his experience with the Galactic Empire, where he has seen the relative effectiveness of the Empire's academy system in supplying more combat-ready troops. They don't have to be the best, but there has to be a lot of them. Finally, he would likely push for active recovery of downed pilots and isolated men, having seen firsthand during the Clone Wars the morale boost to the troops, as well as the simple, ruthless calculus of why waste a trained, loyal man to me without a need. What challenges would Vader face? Well, the first and most certain challenges will be from the Imperial Japanese Military High Command itself. There will be many that will need to be pacified by either the Force or by force as they demand the resources and attention he will be bringing to himself. As a Sith Lord, however, Vader will have no issues destroying anyone that gets in his way. The Force allowing him to sense intentions and have a view of possible futures will also help guide him to the best conclusions possible. Next would be the resource shortages of Japan at this point, with oil especially being extremely difficult for them to procure. Assuming he could not build power generation from his own universe, something he certainly has the skills to make possible if not likely due to materials, he would likely begin searching for new sources of power immediately. Unlike in the real world where you cannot know the locations, the Force itself could help guide him to large undiscovered oil deposits that wouldn't be discovered for decades in the real world. Finally, despite its rapid industrialization pace, Japan would not have the largest or most efficient production base for Vader to work with. His immediate changes to streamline and increase production quality would likely help, but they would still be at a massive disadvantage for years to come. Could Vader overcome these challenges? Very likely yes. He had the skills and the experience to overcome all of them at least separately. There may be several years required, but Vader would likely be able to guide Imperial Japan into an elite military force the likes of which the world had never seen, with insane production numbers for their size. This fits what would likely become Vader's end goal by this period, world conquest. Without the resources to return to his master and usurp his empire, Vader would likely settle on creating his own. The first targets would remain similar to actual history, with Manchuria, Korea, China, and many Pacific islands falling to Vader's Japan. Unlike history, where border conflicts with the Soviets ended the Japanese incursions into the Soviet Far East in favor of taking Dutch island holdings, Vader's precognition and battle prowess would likely allow him to turn the tide and force a Soviet commitment to the Eastern Front. This would relieve pressure on the Germans attacking on their own Eastern Front, which Vader's precognition should allow him to realize if he doesn't realize it strategically alone. He may also send technological assistance to the Germans at this stage, if only as a way to begin building goodwill with their commanders. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, which may come in a different form as Vader would likely be firmly in control of the now puppet Emperor at this point, American production numbers versus Vader's Japan, the American production would still likely win in total numbers. It may not be enough to assure the victory that it did in the real Pacific theater, though. Would Vader continue to lead from the front? Almost certainly. With his unique and unassailable power, as well as his mastery of technology, Vader being on the front lines would be a much lower threat than it would otherwise be for a commander. With the ability to turn away bombs and torpedoes, as well as the more effective tracking and fire control for anti-aircraft fire that would likely vastly increase each individual IJN ship's individual survivability. In history, Japan had an extremely effective carrier force and navy, but their damage control and anti-aircraft fire were considered vastly subpar, both areas that Vader's technological mastery would vastly improve. Combined with his rotational academy system for troops and pilots especially, many of the historic flaws of the Japanese war machine would be naturally healed by Vader's arrival. Vader would likely allow a complete victory for the Japanese, which in history was to basically be allowed to conquer the East in peace. His later actions would likely be dividing the Soviet Union with the Germans, keeping the resource-rich Far East for his growing empire. How would it end then? Vader would likely draw the US into a stalemate in the Pacific. Its productions and military might would still be too great for even his new empire to assail directly so far. An alliance with Germany would likely continue, with Vader attempting to start combining those two forces of Japan and Germany. As these forces would see the effectiveness of his technology and battle tactics, the loyalty of the forces will begin to shift, something Vader will be quietly encouraging the entire time. Eventually, he will have enough control to stage a successful military coup, possibly setting up a new Imperial military faction for both nations to become puppet states of. Having seen the rise of the Empire firsthand in the Clone Wars era, he would likely know the best way to keep things going smoothly would be to let them think they can pick up the pieces later. By creating a new empire, the old members would be thinking, when he fails, rather than trying to make him fail. And as long as he doesn't take too much away from the leaders, enough would be at least left over for them to publicly support him. By the time they realize it would be too late, and with the proper resources to launch a global attack, Vader would finally secure his new realm. What happens to the world then? Like most Sith in the Star Wars universe, Vader would likely begin trying interstellar conquest. Lacking the full resources of his own universe, but well versed in its technology, Vader would be gathering the scientists of the world to try to create hybridized versions of Star Wars tech. The hyperdrive would of course be his ultimate goal, but shielding and blaster technology would also become focuses as he seeks military might he is familiar with. The first extraplanetary rockets in the historical timeline was only a decade or two away. In this new timeline, by the late 50s, it's possible there would already be a man on the moon. As the entire world is turned to this task by force, technology would be taking leaps of hundreds of years per decade, all overseen by Vader himself. Whether he would succeed in his task before his ailing body failed him is a different question. Despite dark-side humans being able to live easily over a century, but also evilly, Vader was heavily wounded on Mustafar and would be lacking the medical technology of his own universe. Things like the Bacta and cybernetics would be long out of his reach in this new era. Eventually, almost certainly by the year 2000, Vader would be dead and his empire would continue to spread itself throughout the stars. Thank you for watching, everybody. Again, if you like these videos and would like to see more, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have someone you think would really enjoy this, please remember to share it with them. Well, I'd much rather live in a world where content speaks for itself that is not the world of current YouTube. With this type of niche content, the only way for people that would enjoy it to ever actually see it is if the viewers engage and share it. Again, thank you for watching.